Our first speaker, Colin, he recently purchased a machete because he wanted to see what it was like to cut fruit with it. But instead of doing that so much, he learned how to saber champagne. So if you have a New Year's party, you should get him on your guest list. Colin, please come up and tell us about the Franklin expedition.
Thanks. It's actually the second machete that I've purchased for the purpose of sabering champagne. So this thing that I'm doing tonight, I actually wrote this thing last February for the Believer. So what you're getting tonight is the shorter, shoutier, drunkier version of that talk. Okay, so this is John Franklin, whom some of you may know, AKA the man who ate his boots. In 1819, he was the leader of a ill-fated, disastrous expedition in northern Canada, in which he, as his moniker implies, actually ate his own boots to stay alive. They were trapped out in like the northern Canadian Arctic for 3 years. They ran out of food and all that stuff. Something like 11 of the 20 people that he went with died. And if you think the boots thing is bad, some of his colleagues actually ate a slightly more nutritious meal, which was other explorers. So there was sort of like you had your choice between eating your neighbors, being eaten by your neighbors, or eating your boots. So that's what he did. He was trapped out there for 3 years. He came back. He said, "I love it. I want to go back." He went back the next year and surprisingly went on one Arctic voyage that he did not totally fuck up. Ended up in Australia after that. Got fat eating not boots. This is him late in life, a little paunchy. Came back, got involved in this Arctic exploration, which maybe you guys know about. So in 1845, he took two ships, the Terror and the Erebus, named after mountains in Antarctica, and 129 men with the goal of finding the Northwest Passage. They sailed in 1845. They had provisions for 3 years. They thought they would just truck right on over to Canada, land in the Bering Strait, all would be good. It did not go well. And that's a artist rendering of the Terror and the Erebus not going well. So they had provisions for 3 years. After 2 years, his wife got panicked and started getting people to send out expeditions. Over the next 10 years, they sent at least 20 expeditions out looking for the Franklin ships, so much so that this part of the history of Arctic exploration is simply known as the search for Franklin. They sent dozens of ships. And so the first question tonight is, they had provisions for 3 years. They were trapped in the Arctic. Why were you still sending out ships 10 years later hoping to find him alive? That is the question. So the answer is, basically, there was a prevailing theory that if you got above the pack ice, if you just kept going north and north and north and north, past the crazy icebergs and all that shit, you would find an open polar sea, a temperate, beautiful, sunny, lovely, calm sea. And that, in fact, that what had happened to Franklin was that his ships had actually made it past the pack ice. They had gotten beyond all the ice. They were up at the North Pole, living like kings off the fat of the land, where there were lovely animals, there were all sorts of flora, and they were doing just fine. And so this is the open polar sea theory you can kind of see here. Basically, the idea is that the North Pole was actually this kind of temperate, almost sort of tropical environment. This is the second secretary to the British Admiralty, John Barrow, who is basically the guy who sent Franklin and his men to his death. He wrote, "There is every reason to believe that at all times a very large portion of the polar sea is entirely free of ice." So this is where they think Franklin is hiding. He's just trapped. He can't get back, but he's up there. He's fine. This is a really old idea, the idea of the open polar sea. This is actually a map by Mercator, who you guys probably know made the map that you guys all use, like the Mercator projection, which is sort of the standard map of the world. This is a slightly more problematic one, but again, you can sort of see this idea that like if you just go north enough, you're going to find a sea. It's going to be great. So that's the open polar sea, and basically, before you completely write this off as completely fucked up, this is not a terrible idea. And you can kind of see in this map, there's this kind of the Gulf Stream. The idea is basically, by the 19th century, people had a much better understanding of both like currents and tides and climate. And the hypothesis behind the polar sea was that it's actually being fed by tropical like currents, and that's why it's actually open up there. So the warm water is going from the Caribbean, it's going under the ice, it's emerging near the north, and that's sort of keeping it nice and warm. And I will say, when I was up in Svalbard, which is 1,000 feet above the tree line, and in Svalbard there is driftwood from the Caribbean. And so it's not a completely fucked up idea, but it's wrong. So this is the USS Jeannette. In 1879, the Jeannette was the last voyage to really push for the open polar sea. They went up through the Pacific rather than the Atlantic. They thought that would be better. They went up through the Bering Sea. They got trapped in ice, unsurprisingly. Were trapped up there for like 2 years. The ship was crushed by ice. Like 20 out of 44 men died. It was a big fucking disaster. There's a Hampton Sides book that's pretty good if you want to read about that. But that was pretty much the end of the open polar sea theory. And they were the last to sort of try out this idea that if you just kept going, you could get up there. So what about this guy? So he's not living up in the North Pole, and there's no open polar sea, but he could in fact still be alive. Maybe he didn't make it just to the North Pole. Maybe, in fact, he made it inside. And so this is what's commonly referred to as a Sims hole, named after John Cleves Sims, who in 1818, he was a veteran of the War of 1812, and he went around basically saying, look, the Earth is hollow, and there are giant fucking holes at the North and South Pole, and you can go inside them. And he actually got John Quincy Adams interested in this, almost to the point of like launching a U.S. government-sponsored expedition. Both Poe and Thoreau make references to Sims holes, so they're pretty excellent. So the idea is basically that what happened is Franklin and his men made it to the North Pole, and then they got inside. And this is actually a guy named Cornelius P. Brodnag. It's a pretty kick-ass name. Basically was among the many people who argued that Franklin what happened is he got inside. He is living there with the lost tribe of Israel, who when the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, an angel sort of like grabbed them and said, guys, come with me. Took them inside to the center of the earth. So that's why John Franklin and his men all speak this really weird Hebrew dialect now. And they're all down there, and they're living off the fat of the land, which takes the form of these woolly mammoths that they're eating. And it's just a grand old fucking time down there. So this is sort of the other theory of what might have happened. So unfortunately, unlike the open polar sea, this one is I guess like the open polar sea, this one is also not true. So basically, I want to sort of talk about these two different things because they're. By the way, Franklin turned out never made it to the North Pole, and when they found remnants, it became clear that at the end they had devolved into cannibalism. And Charles Dickens, in a completely dick move, Charles Dickens editorialized that basically the accounts of the Franklin cannibalism were fabricated by the indigenous Canadians because you can't trust native Indians, and like these good British men would never have resorted to cannibalism. They were probably murdered by these Native Americans because Dickens was an asshole. So the things basically the thing about the open polar sea theory is it's wrong. This is the one thing I want all of you guys to take away. It's wrong, but it is not bullshit. It was a pretty good theory. It just happened to be wrong. And if you are if you're my dad and you read that Hampton Sides book and you're like, what a bunch of morons! They sent a bunch of people up to the Arctic to die over this like fucked up wrong theory. No, it was a good theory. And again, when you think about the 19th century was a whole everything was being overturned. All these ideas were being overturned. So if you're like standing in Greenland and you're like, there's nothing up there but ice, I can see with my own damn eyes. This is the same century in which that guy Semmelweis was institutionalized in Austria, basically for arguing that there are little weird microscopic things on your hands that you can't even see that are making you sick, right? So the whole arc of the 19th century was, there are things that you cannot trust your eyes. There are things that you cannot see that are true. And a lot of that was right. So the open polar sea idea is basically, just because when you look north you see ice, that doesn't make it so. And in fact, now that we understand climate, we understand current, we understand all the weird ways in which the world works, it's actually quite plausible that there is an open polar sea. So it's actually like a good theory. It just was wrong. So as opposed to the Sims hole theory, which is not a good theory. It's it's a bad theory, but it's also awesome. And so basically, when we sort of look back on old, outdated science and bad ideas and archaic beliefs, one of the things that's really important to sort of do, at least for me anyways, is to sort of think about there's difference between good theories that turned out to be wrong and bullshit theories that were obviously wrong. And I think when you look back at Arctic exploration, it's really easy to dismiss a lot of the ideas that they thought as just sort of universally shitty, when in fact some of them were actually really good theories that just didn't pan out. So that's the one thing. The other thing is, and again, what these guys were doing in looking for the open polar sea was actually, that was really good science, and it sucked that several hundred men and several dozen ships all were destroyed in the process. But that's sort of exactly what science is about. It's about testing a bad hypothesis until it's gone. And so if you're going to leave with anything tonight, it's that the open polar sea theory is a fine fucking theory. And my dad is wrong. All right. I guess that's it. Thank you. Do you guys have questions? Yeah. Say that again? So basically, during the Napoleonic Wars, Britain ramped up its navy beyond belief. So they had this massive navy. And after the Napoleonic Wars ended, they now had all of these sailors and all of these ships, and they didn't know what to do with them because there wasn't any war to fight. And so the search for the Northwest Passage became a really good way to keep the Navy occupied. And so that's why it was all done out of the Admiralty. And all of these expeditions, there were some launched by the United States, but the vast majority were launched by England. And the Franklin expedition was really the sort of this is not just for science. This is for England, right? And that's also why people like Charles Dickens were such assholes about it. That there's no way that England could have resorted to cannibalism. This is us, So it was very much a sort of English colonialism thing, but sort of with a minimal of actual exploitation of other populations. So that's why they just absolutely refused to do it. Also, his wife was extremely well connected, and was very good about like even after the British Navy gave up, that's when she went to the United States, and that's why there were several expeditions launched from the United States looking for Franklin, because his wife Jane Franklin was really, really good at convincing people to send ships and money to the Arctic to their deaths. That was a talent she had. So. Oh yeah. Up until at least 1992. So it is taken seriously until the North Pole is discovered or reached in the early 1920s. So, I mean, this is the nice thing about the poles is until they actually found them, you could just imagine anything. This is why there's a great Jules Verne novel where they get to the North Pole and there's a giant volcano. What's that? No, it's not. It's The Adventures of Captain Hatteras. No, they go in through Iceland. They don't. Yeah, but in the Adventures of Captain Hatteras, they reach. He's this sort of Ishmael, or sorry, not Ishmael. Who's the other guy? Ahab. He's this Ahab character who they get to the North Pole, and he really wants to get to 90 degrees north, but there is a volcano on the North Pole, and he is so bummed that he can only get to 89 degrees in 99 minutes that he jumps into the volcano, which Jules Verne's publishers hated, so they made him change. So instead of jumping into the volcano, he just gets really depressed at the end. And the novel ends with this dejected Ahab going I didn't make it to the North Pole because there's a volcano there. But you could make that shit until they actually got there, and there's oh, there's no volcano, there's just a bunch of fucking ice. Sorry, everybody. So, yeah. Yeah. Because they knew that when you're trucking through the Arctic, you have a very limited amount of time. You usually have a couple of months in the summer when the ice breaks up. So it was actually fairly common where you would you'd sail, and then September or so, you would take down the sails, and then you'd have all your men haul your massive ship out of the water onto the ice, and that way it didn't get crushed by the ice, and they would just winter, in this boat, on sort of dry on ice, and they would winter, and then hopefully next July the water would return, and then they could launch again, and they could try and get farther. This is also what happened in the Jeannette. The Jeannette was basically iced up for 2 years, and they kept waiting, and then finally the water the ice melted, and they're like, woohoo! And then literally 8 hours later, the ice froze up again and crushed the ship, which is again, kind of a dick move on the ice's part. It's waited 2 years, and now you get to go. No, you don't. So, yeah. Starting in about 1850, they started. They found traders, Trader, not the backstabbers, in Canada, who were trading plates with China from the expedition, and that was their sort of first clue. And so then they never found the ships, although I think they actually found them 2 months ago. They found the Erebus 2 months ago. They found it actually earlier. They found it earlier, but then they sat on the news because there's a whole political thing going on. What's that? Yeah, and because Canada now wants to make sure that they own the Arctic, because now everybody's fighting for it because it's all going to melt. But they started finding China and silverware, and that's when they knew that they sort of started to piece together the story of what happened, and they went and they interviewed all of the indigenous people out there, and they were yeah, we saw a bunch of hungry ass motherfucking white people walking that way 10 years ago, and we were can't do nothing for you, man, because living out here is cold and hard, and I ain't got no extra seal meat for your fucking hungry ass. Good luck. And then, I don't know, they went over there and died somewhere. Sorry. So that was sort of, so they pretty much knew by like the 50s, but that's when people started like sort of, the conspiracy theories got a little bit more wilder, because they pretty much knew, but they didn't have like, you know, definitive evidence. So they're like, oh, well, maybe they're inside, they're living inside, they're down with the woolly mammoths. It's cool. So, yeah. Thanks, everybody.